And we have here Richard Reibstein, who's going to talk about how the pollution prevention idea revealed how we can achieve sustainability. Everyone excited? Yes. So let's give him applause and invite him to the stage.
Tanan. Mulon vaka heya mail TalveAkadeemia o salada. This is my second time in Estonia. I came in 1995. Any of you remember 1995? Okay. So you were newly independent from Russia. It was a very exciting time. And the World Environment Center, which is a nonprofit, had funded the establishment of pollution prevention centers. No? Yes? I'm in the way? Pollution prevention centers in the Baltic states and in Poland. And they flew me in to train the people who were working in those centers. So I have to ask you, first of all, how many of you know what I mean when I say pollution prevention? Okay. So what's the best thing to do with pollution? Pollution is bad, right? Okay, so you should not have it, right? So when you have it, what do? You get rid of it. Okay. You clean it up. So you have a factory and you have smoke coming out of the factory. You tell the factory what? You can't make products anymore? No, you don't tell them that. You tell them stop making that smoke come out, okay? So they take the smoke and they put it through a big bag and they filter it and they shock it with electricity or they run water through it and they create another waste. They create a sludge and they create a bag full of filtered particulates and they have to bury that. What they're doing is they're shifting the pollution from one medium, the air, to another medium, the water. That's called pollution control. And the agency, the government, which acts for all of us in a healthy society, the government is making them do that. And the government is making them pay money. And so what do they think about the government? They hate it. And they are opposed to the people who want the government to do that. And we have created a division in our world between those who say we should make businesses pay to do this and those who say leave businesses alone. They're having enough trouble making money and providing jobs. We create a division. When we are going to succeed in making a sustainable world is when we are working together, not when we are divided. And what we need to have is a government and a society that imposes costs when they are necessary. Now, the smoke is bad and it needs to be stopped, so it is necessary. But that is just a very primitive, beginner's way of looking at the problem. Much better is to say, what is happening inside the factory that makes the smoke? Can we get a change inside the factory that will stop the smoke before it happens? And if we take an analytical view, then we might find some answers. That is what pollution prevention is about. So I have been doing this work since 1988. And I want to give you a little background just about me so that you can maybe relate to me as a person. So I was like you. I was studying in school. What shall I do with my life? And I became worried about environmental issues. And maybe, how many of you are worried about environmental problems? Okay, how many of you are so worried that you're depressed? You're not that depressed if you're laughing. So, how many of you really worry so much that you think, oh my God, I can't believe what's happening. I can't do anything else with my life? Okay, so that's a true environmentalist. The people who say, I can't waste my time making money or having accomplishments that are transitory. They're nice, accomplishments are great, but the world is dying. and I must focus on this problem. Only a few hands went up. Those are the true environmentalists. Everybody else may be green to one degree or another, but the ones that I recognize as brothers and sisters in the fight to save the world are those who cannot think of doing anything else with their life. Now, that doesn't mean that doing anything else is not legitimate and not wonderful, but we must incorporate in all of our lives this idea that we all have to do something. And people who do not incorporate into their lives the idea that they must do something, that they personally, individually are responsible as well as everyone else for what is happening to this world, they are not environmentalists. So you can be an industrialist, you can be an educator, you can be a movie star and be a true environmentalist if you do what you can in your life to deal with this issue, and you regard it as the most important thing happening today. In my view, it is the most important thing happening today. Nothing else matters if we let all the species die, and the rate of extinction is as fast as we have ever seen in the historical record. This is now called the sixth extinction. The change of the atmosphere is calamitous. We have people in the United States who say that it should be 350 parts per million of carbon in the atmosphere, but it's already 400. That's the international consensus on both of those issues. And yet we have people who say climate change is not happening and climate change is not the fault of humanity, which shows us that people are nuts. They're crazy. They're not focused on reality. That's a calamity. They don't recognize reality. Their psychological obstacles to recognizing the truth are so strong. It says that something is very wrong with our society if we can't even have the truth be clear to everyone. So we're in great amount of trouble. Here in Estonia, you're doing pretty well. You have clean air. You have clean water. You yourselves look very healthy. It's a very beautiful country. I love coming here. You have wildlife in the woods. You have woods. But you are not unconnected. And as the rest of the world becomes deteriorated, it will affect you. Okay, I live in a very good part of the world too. I live in New England. We have forests. We are losing wildlife. Our wildlife is changing, but we still have some. We still have natural beauty. But I know what is happening. A lot of what is happening is invisible, and people can't see it. I know that there are experiments where they test what is in people's bodies. It's called toxic body burden. And they are finding hundreds of chemicals in people's bodies. And what I do is about toxics use reduction, reducing the use of toxics. So I pay attention to toxic issues. And I say to myself, how can people be aware that there are hundreds of chemicals that are toxic in their bodies and not be concerned? But I see that people are not concerned. They say, no, it doesn't matter. They're at such a low level that it's not toxic. But to me, it's an alarm bell. If they are there, then in 50 years, they will be there at a higher level. If they are there now at this level, there will be more. So we must act now. People don't see the extinctions happening. People don't see the groundwater being used up. People don't see the climate changing. People don't see the pollutants in the air. People don't see that on coatings on their walls, they may have lead paint, or they may have volatile organic chemicals coming off, or from fabrics, or that it has the materials we use have flame retardants in them that are neurotoxic or are disruptive of our endocrine systems. People don't see this. But 20 years later, they have cancer. And they'd say, why do I have cancer? Scientists used to say that the environmental contribution to cancer was very small, and scientists are beginning to change their mind. We're beginning to hear that it could possibly be very large. And this is because we don't see the connection. We have to understand the science before we see the connection. But I do not need to wait for proof. I see something which seems to be very clear to me, which is that if you load the world up with toxic chemicals, you will have sickness. I don't need to wait for the epidemiological proof. It makes sense to me. You should make things out of safer materials. If you have the earth filled with 7 billion people, you will use up your resources. I don't need to wait to see it happen. I know it's not good. I think we should be back down to 2 or 3 billion people. And how do we get there? It's plain to me. Empower women. Women's rights all around the world. And birth control information and help everywhere. Simple. I don't need a study to prove it. It's common sense. We don't use this common sense. Yes, sir. Yes.
I have been also puzzled a little bit about similar issues, that why is actually birth rate falling? And we know that empowering women and all this story currently works, but it's evolutionary not stable. So in, I don't know, 20 generations, maybe it doesn't work anymore because, well, there are always women or also men who want to have more children, even in rich societies. And whether we are able to voluntarily push down the number of children for a longer period, I am not sure.
Well, I'm not sure either. We must go with the best information and the best thinking we can muster. But what I would like to say, getting back to my topic, I think I've introduced enough general thoughts. I want to tell you about the program where I work in Massachusetts. And in that program, we use voluntary means. I work in a program that uses assistance. So it's very different from the government coming in and ordering you to do something. I work for the government. I also teach at BU, Boston University, but I also work for the state of Massachusetts doing pollution prevention, and we call it toxics use reduction first. We also do energy efficiency and water conservation and waste reduction, but we focus on toxics. We think that's very, very important because toxics is the beginning of all pollution. The decision to use a toxic chemical is what creates air pollution and water pollution and worker exposure and toxics in products and waste and contamination and accidents from transportation and accidents from storage. Just deciding not to use a toxic chemical can solve all of those problems. It is the source, the root cause of all of those problems. So better than telling the company to put a box on the end of their smokestack to control the smoke, better to get them to say, can I use something safer that doesn't create a toxic smoke? So that's what we're looking for all the time, and it's voluntary. So as the gentleman asked, he's not sure if voluntary will work. Well, no, it doesn't always work. There are many companies that I've worked with, and I make suggestions, and they ignore them. And they continue doing their environmentally destructive things, and my voluntary help did not stop it. So we need a two-handed approach. The first hand is the hand of friendship. That's the offer of assistance. That's from me. I'm Mr. Friendly. Hi, how are you? I come to help. Would you like to work with me? And they say, yes, and we work together and we have success. That's the typical story. Or they say, stay away from me. Don't come to my factory. Don't talk to me. You are from government. I hate you. I am trying to lower my taxes. You are making me pay a lot of money. You are a communist. Go away. I'm telling you about America. If you are a right-winger in America, you think all left-wingers are communists. So that's the way it is. In that case, if the company is still polluting, we have the other hand, and that is the hand of enforcement. I have also been an enforcement attorney, and I have enforced against many people who are violating the law. And about half of them were in violation because they just made a mistake, and they were actually good people who just weren't thoughtful enough. And finding them, penalizing them, wakes them up, and they behave better, and it's a good thing. Half of them are careless people who don't wish to be more responsible and can even be called evil. I don't do that to their face, but I do it at home. And they need enforcement. We need to enforce against them. But the way environmental policy has been done conventionally and in most countries is we apply enforcement to everyone. We consider everyone to be a potential violator and we treat them all the same. And that is wrong. We need to differentiate. We need to say these are people of good faith. We need to know if they are trying or not actively trying to evade the law before we even decide what to penalize them. And we need to say, you're in violation and you're in violation, but you were in violation because you weren't trying hard enough or because you made a mistake, and you were in violation because you really don't care. We need to understand that, and we need to enforce against these people much more strongly. When I was an enforcement attorney, I did that. And if I thought someone really did not care and was lying to me and had shown a pattern of consciously trying to evade and was harming people, I tried to put them out of business. And if I saw people over here had made a mistake, I tried to make my penalty as small as I could, and I tried to use that penalty so that they would change their processes and never get in trouble again and avoid the toxics. So that's by way of general information. Let me tell you a little bit about the office where I work. It's called the Office of Technical Assistance, and we do all of these things. And people don't normally think that they need help. They think, we're doing everything fine, we're doing great. You know, we're getting product out the door, we're making money, we're paying our bills. What's the problem? So I usually have to get them interested in my help by saying to them, there are all these laws. Are you sure you're following them all correctly? So what I do often is put on workshops around the state about new environmental laws or old ones, making sure you're in compliance. And they come because they're afraid that they're not in compliance. And then I tell them what the laws are, explain them. I'm an environmental, what I teach at BU is environmental law. And I also teach at Harvard Extension. That's a nice name, Harvard, right? So gives me credibility. So I tell them this. They believe me because I said the word Harvard. And then they think I know what I'm talking about. And then I give them a lot of information. They go, oh, this is too much. I'm overwhelmed. Will you come help me? And they understand that the service that I give, that my office gives, is confidential. So we're not going to tell on them. That's very important, that we are safe. So, and we are free. No money. So some of them will take the offer and we will visit them and we will look at their processes and see if they're in compliance with laws, which is their primary interest. But then as we look at things, we point out opportunities that we see and we ask them questions that are designed to help them to be aware that they have options. We can't go in and tell people what to do. We don't know how to do what they do. But we can ask questions that help them to understand what they need to do. So actually, let me get the other thing up. You don't want to lose that. So let me tell you a little story. It was before I came in 95, in 1988, when I was first given this task. I said I was going to go back and tell you a little bit about myself. I was in college. I was depressed about the environment. So I could not find good work in the environment. I went to law school to get credentials. I didn't really want to be a lawyer. I just wanted to find a way to get a better job doing environmental work, and it was very hard to do. And the jobs that I got were about cleaning up of contaminated sites, and compensating victims. I worked for people who had been exposed to radiation and had gotten cancer, and I worked for the widows of people who had died because they had been exposed to cancer in the nuclear atomic testing program where they tested bombs, and people were exposed, hundreds of thousands of people were exposed to radiation during the Cold War. And I worked for their wives, their widows, men who died. It was very sad work. And then I worked reporting on contaminated sites and their cleanup, and that was very depressing work. And then I worked for looking at the environmental problems at facilities for the state, and there were very many problems, and no one was doing anything about them. There were PCB, polychlorobiphenyl wastes, there was asbestos, there was lead, all sorts of dangerous things, and no one wanted to do anything about it. And my job was to make people wake up and be concerned and start spending money. I did very, very well. I got a whole program started, but this is all after the problem has started. And then I found out that there was a little office doing this thing called pollution prevention. And they called it source reduction, reducing waste at the source by looking at the reason you have the waste and seeing if you can find a way to avoid having the waste. I said, that's what I want to do, 1988. And I wish upon all of you that you will have that moment where you will find the thing that you can do. That is the thing that will help avoid the problem. When you find that, you will be able to keep going. Before that, I kept getting burned out. I kept getting depressed. It was so awful doing the work that I did. It made me want to stop. If you want to work in the environmental field, you have to find the way that you can do it, that you have the continuous energy to do it, that makes you feel good, that makes you feel effective. So I wish upon all of you who care and are looking for a way to incorporate this into your life or make it your life, that you find that way of doing the work. So I feel very lucky. I found that in 1988. I became a happy person. And it is therapeutic to do work that makes a difference. It helps you to deal psychologically with taking in more information about how bad things are. If you cannot find that, you will find yourself turning away. And that's what everybody does. It's invisible, so it's easy to turn away, and it's distressing to take information in about it, so people say either it doesn't exist or it doesn't matter. Okay? The first one is denial, and the second one is disavowal. And denial is easier to deal with, because if somebody says it's not happening, you can prove to them it is happening. But if somebody said, okay, it's happening, but it doesn't matter, they are tougher to deal with. So you need to understand these psychological happenings in yourself, and you need to understand them in other people. And your first task is to find a way to conquer them in yourself, and that is by finding what you can do. So I found this, and this is the results of a study that I did. What I found was the way of helping people, this program of voluntary assistance, lead with helping first, and very great deal happens. So I have been into hundreds of companies. And the office where I work is mostly engineers, but I'm not an engineer, and it's very important to have non-engineers, because engineers think very narrowly about the problem, and you need people who don't know to ask interesting questions. And I will walk into a factory and I don't know how it's made, and I would ask questions and people would answer the questions, and it's asking the questions that makes the difference. So let me tell you a couple of stories about how that has worked. One place that I walked into was having a problem with lead in their water. They discharged their water to the local sewage treatment facility, and the sewage treatment facility told them that they had too much lead in the discharge. And so the company called us. So as I mentioned, it's compliance with the law that influences many people to come with us to ask for our help. So we came to visit, and they were making pottery glazes. So they had powders, and the powders had actually many heavy metals in them, not just lead, but they had all kinds of heavy metals in them. Today, pottery glazes are made much more safely, but this was in 1989. And there were a lot of heavy metals in these glazes. And they had these big bags of powder, and they had them all over the place. And they said, you know, we're not putting it in the water. We're putting it in this vessel and mixing it, and we're not trying to put it in the water. And so we just looked at what they did. And I was looking at one of the bags. I said, it's ripped. There's a tear here, and there's some powder coming out. And they go, oh, yeah, that happens sometimes. And I said, well, what happens to that powder on the floor? And they said, well, we come with a hose at the end of the day and we hose it down. So he's laughing because it's so obvious. And you have to say to yourself, well, why didn't you ever see that before? What's the matter with you? Because people are narrow. They're focused on getting the job done. And no one ever had taken a look around. They go, the manager looks at the papers and the reports, and the person who brings the stuff in looks at that, but they're not thinking about the problem of the lead discharge. And the person who is responsible for environmental management is not talking to this person or taking a walk around. They're not even welcome to take a walk around because everyone has their little department. That's why it's good to have someone from the outside come in and look. So I actually saw that particular kind of mistake in many factories. It was common. I helped a company, a textile company, with copper discharges. It was the same thing. They had a bag, and every time they put copper dye into the vat, they would put in a scoop, and a couple of little grains would fall on the floor, and then they would come and wash that down at the end of the day. So the answers are very simple to this. You just use a different container. You put something underneath to catch the grains and the powders. You maybe use a pneumatic system to transfer instead of paper bags. You have a big delivery in a large container and transfer that way. So many different ways to handle this, but it's a simple problem to handle. Another place we went into was having a dust problem. So I don't know if you pay attention to dust here, but we are paying more attention to dust in the United States because sometimes dust explodes or there's a fire from dust, very bad to breathe. And the Occupational Safety Administration, the Worker Protection Agency, is paying attention to combustible dusts. So the company had a visit from OSHA that fined them $20,000 and said, you have to clean the pipes on the top, which are getting dust on them, every week. And they thought it would cost them another $20,000 a month to do that. It was tremendously expensive. And they called us in, help us, please. We can't afford these costs. So we said, well, why do you have the dust? What causes the dust? They're making boxes, and they had paper going through a cutter. And we went and we looked at the cutter, and they said, we think the dusts are coming from here, from the cutting operation. And we looked at it, we watched it, and we said, well, look at how it's cutting. It's tearing. And when you tear, you're creating the dusts. Why don't you take that cutter out and sharpen it? Simple. And if that doesn't work, put a ventilation, a tube, to suck the dust right there. Put it right there to suck the dust right at the point of generation. So sometimes the answers are that clear and that simple. And sometimes someone who is just using common sense can see the answers to the questions. And sometimes they're not. But you get process thinking. You get something going where innovation can happen. So we went to a company that makes plastic. And they said, we have a lot of waste plastic. We want to grind it up and reuse it, but we can't grind it. It's too hard to grind. So we thought about it, and we came up with the idea, what if you freeze it? If you freeze it, you'll make it brittle. Maybe it will grind then. And they said, oh, that's a wonderful idea. Now, I mean, any one of you could have come up with that idea. You know that plastic becomes brittle when you freeze it. You don't have to be an engineer to know this. And it was just an idea. So then they looked into it, and they found out that a refrigeration unit that would chill and freeze the plastic would be too expensive. So they called us back, and they said, we're not doing your idea. It's too expensive. And then a week later, they called us, and they said, but we found out that if you just chill it, we don't have to freeze it, but we just make it cool. It works. And they could use a cheap chiller instead of an expensive refrigeration unit. And so we didn't have the answer for them, but we started the process of thinking, and then they came up with the answer themselves. I'll tell you another. Do you like stories? Yeah. Okay, so I'll tell you another story. This story is about one of the most famous companies in the world. I told you that my service is confidential, so I can't tell you who they are. But I will tell you that they're what's called a Fortune 500 company, one of the wealthiest companies in the world. They make jet engines. So I walked into their place, and the management, the upper management, had said, we want you all to be trained in pollution prevention, but the people in the factory didn't believe in it. and they didn't like having someone come from the outside and tell them what to do, and they were laughing at, it wasn't just me, we were a team, and they were laughing at us behind our backs. You can tell when people do that. When they do not respect you, you can tell. And I know because I go into all these places and people are happy to see me. So when they're not happy to see me, there's a big difference. So they were just waiting for us to make fools of ourselves. And we're walking around looking at the facility, and they're just going, they're never going to find anything. We do everything perfectly well, and they are idiots to think they can tell us anything. They're just, I can see that they're doing this. And I have like 5 people following me, just waiting for me to say something stupid. And I walk, the first place I go is, they're going to take me all these places, and I stop at the very first place because it's this big bay, and there's this big circle of metal, this big ring, which you know is part of a jet engine, and it's sitting in this big tank filled with oil. So I just said, what's that? What's going on here? And they said, oh, this is a part, and it comes packed in oil. And I said, why does it come packed in oil? They said, because otherwise it will rust. The oil prevents it from rusting. And I go, oh, that's a lot of oil to keep it from rusting. And they go, yeah. Okay, they don't care. So then so they want me to move on. So I say, okay, but what happens to the oil? And they go, what happens to the oil? Who knows? And I said, well, let's talk about what happens to the oil. And they go, well, we don't know what happens to the oil. So they start running around. Who knows what happens to the oil? And 5-10 minutes later, somebody comes up and says, oh, when we take the big ring out, we tip that tank over and pour the oil down the drain there. So I said, okay, where does the drain go? And they go, we don't know where the drain goes. So they run around for 10 minutes. They find somebody who shows us where the drain goes, and we follow where it goes. And it goes to this thing, and it's this big pit. And I said, so what's this? What happens here? And they, I don't know. So they go, they find somebody who says, okay, that's called the ecology pit. It was the ecology pit, believe it or not. And so I said, what happens in the ecology pit? And what happens and so the guy says, there's an oil-water separator in there. I said, oh, okay, so let's recap what's happening so far. You mix the oil with water, which you didn't have to do, and now you're going to separate it out from the water. So at least you're separating it out from the water, but do you see that this is a waste of time and energy? And they're going, yeah, we see that. And then turns out the oil-water separator isn't working. So I said, what happens to it now? And they run around for 10 minutes. They finally get somebody to come in and say, well, we pay to have it hauled off. I said, how much are you paying for that? Turns out they're paying thousands of dollars a week to have the oil-water mixture sent off and handled as a waste. So they're all, at this point, totally ashamed of themselves and totally humbled. And we go back and we talk about things, and we say, well, what are some answers to this question? And someone says, you know, we don't have to use oil to prevent tarnishing. We can use shrink-wrap plastic. Now, shrink-wrap plastic isn't the greatest thing in the world, but it's a lot better than a big tank of oil. And another person came up with the idea, we can take that oil and we can reuse it. It's clean. We can reuse it. We don't have to throw it away. So many ideas come out from prompting, just from asking questions. And that's how we do our work. So what happened to here we are. So in 1990, every state in the country had a pollution prevention assistance center, like you started in 1995 in Estonia, and I don't think you have anymore. It was the rage. It was the new idea. Pollution prevention, that's what we're going to do. There was a 1990 Pollution Prevention Act passed by Congress that was going to change the way we do everything. And it swept the world. And that's why one was established here. And they were established all around the world. And this has very much died down. And there's a few reasons for that. One reason is that when you do pollution prevention and when you stop using toxic chemicals, what happens to the people who sell chemicals? They lose sales. In Massachusetts, we have reduced, we estimate, almost 1 billion pounds of toxics use. Now, we measure according to production. So if you look at absolute numbers, that has remained fairly stable. But because Massachusetts had a boom in manufacturing from mid-1980s to 2000, it hasn't continued to boom, but it increased vastly. We figure that toxics use would have about doubled if we had continued at the same rate as before, but it didn't. It stayed absolutely flat. So we think that we reduced hundreds of billions of pounds. The other way we look at it is we look at companies that are in the law that have to do what the law says. I didn't tell you what the law says they have to do. I'll tell you in a second. The law's requirements apply to several hundred companies, and we look at their performance, and they have all drastically reduced, very dramatically reduced their toxics use. So this is bad for sales for chemical companies. And they have resisted the growth of this approach. So that and companies don't like to be told what to do. So what the law requires them to do is to track their chemical use very carefully. If you're using a toxic chemical and you're covered by the law, you have to account for how you are using it. You have to say, this is how much I bring in, this is how I use it, and this is how much goes out, and you measure what your input against your output. If they don't balance, you know that you are not accounting for something. Something is being lost. You should know where it all goes. I used 20,000 pounds, and 10,000 went to water, 5,000 went to the air, 2,000 went out in the waste. What happened to the other 3,000? You need to know where it went. It went into the product, or it got lost somewhere. You need to know. So tracking makes companies handle their materials more efficiently, and they will reduce their losses, and they will reduce their purchases because they will not buy extra. That saves the money. This enables us to talk about doing these things without ever having to rely on them being environmentally conscientious. So there's a great benefit to this approach, which is that you can argue for it on just business terms. The second thing that the law requires is for the companies to do a planning process. They have to look at their options for using less chemicals or safer chemicals. They don't have to do anything. The law is flexible and doesn't say you shall reduce. It says you shall think about reducing. That's true. And then to ensure that they make a good faith effort, we have a third party, a qualified consultant that will look at their plan and say, yes, they did a good faith effort. They looked at all their options and they assessed whether they made sense, and they didn't just fake it. And then we have the chief of the facility says, yes, we didn't fake it, we were sincere. And an inspector can come and look at what they did and see if they really went through the process. And that's how we have assurances that they take this seriously. But then we also offer assistance, and that helps a big deal. So every state in the country had an assistance program, but they didn't have all this other stuff that I told you. Some of them had different pieces of what I told you, but Massachusetts did all of that. Plus, we put a little fee to pay for the program on the toxics use. So another reason why these programs have not taken off around the world is people don't like the fee. People don't like being told what to do, even though it's very flexible. So it hasn't taken off, and the benefits of it are not visible. Remember I told you that it's hard to act on pollution problems because they are invisible. You don't see the cancer happening, so you don't connect the cancer with the presence of toxics in our lives, with the toxicity of the things that we buy. We don't see that connection. Well, we also don't see the good things. So these programs all around the country, which have now been diminished in funding and in resources, were doing a great job, but people weren't seeing that they had the benefit. In Massachusetts, we have the reporting of the toxics use, so we can track the results. So I was one of the only people in my field to be able to measure the impact of our assistance program. And this is from the report. when I issued, that I did in 2006. And when I issued this, it was the first time any program had proven their effectiveness. And the United States Environmental Protection Agency had me give this talk to the whole country. They broadcast it to all the environmental agencies. They didn't all watch it, but they tried to get the word out because this was important. This was the first time that it had been proven that assistance, the voluntary program that everyone thinks voluntary is extra and it won't really work, and we don't know that it'll work, as that man said. We don't know that women's empowerment will actually work. We may have to do something more. Well, yeah, fine, but let's try it first and let's see. And this shows that it does work. So these are the companies at the top who were visited, and then after that, companies that were never visited, and then after that, companies that were not yet visited. So the companies that we visited later, but we look at their performance before we were visited. And if you look down at all the years, you see at the top, the numbers are the biggest. And they're much bigger sometimes. These are the reductions that they achieved in pounds and in percent and in pounds. And in every case, the companies that we visited had much larger achievement than the companies that were not visited. Okay, can you see that? Can you go down to the next page of, yeah, keep going down to some more pages. Let's see, yeah. Yeah, go up to that one. Yeah, okay, see this one? These are the companies who, well, yeah, these are the companies who we visited, and you can see how much better they're performing. There's one chart where the companies that we never visited are actually doing the best, and that's because we never visited them. They don't need help. They're already doing very well. But in every other chart, the companies that we visited have the best performance. So that's enough. Let's go to the other slide.
Do you mean economic performance?
No, I mean performance in reduction of toxics use. So looking at their, let's get out of that report and go to the other thing. Yes, yes, that one, thank you. That's the one. I think you dropped the thing. Yeah. So in terms of economic performance, thank you for asking that. We have studied that. I didn't do it, but we have a sister agency, and if any of you are interested in the toxics use program, there's the agency, my agency visits companies. There's another agency at the University of Lowell, University of Massachusetts Lowell, called the Toxics Use Reduction Institute, TURI. You have a TURI in Estonia. Yes. This is my TURI. You have your TURI, my TURI. So TURI, the Toxics Use Reduction Institute, has many reports about how you can do toxics use reduction, how it works. And one of their reports is a study of the economic impact. And the companies that are covered by the Act were asked, did you see any economic benefits from this? And they reported economic benefits that were twice as high as the costs of the regulation. And then the study actually mistakenly counted the money they spent on doing toxics use reduction as a cost. And it's not. As I told you, this was not required. They didn't have to do anything. Those were all business decisions. They were investments in improving their own company. So those should be counted actually as a benefit, not a cost. But even without that, the savings exceeded the costs of the regulation. This is not the way people think about environmental regulation. And if people understood that environmental regulation can be done this way so that it benefits businesses, maybe they would support it more. So this is a very important idea. And my title of my talk is How Pollution Prevention Reveals How We Can Do Sustainability. We have a lot of changes we need to make in order to address the problems that I have started off talking about. We can make them. If we realize that there are ways to write regulations that help businesses, if we realize that there are ways to help them with assistance programs and education, and if we realize that this is good for everyone, then maybe we can have strong, effective regulations. Maybe we can empower government to do these things. Instead of the way we are thinking now, which is that we need less government and less taxes and less burden and let businesses do what they want to do, that is the road to destruction. I'll just give you one example. Right now, everybody thinks that it's great we have natural gas supplies from fracking because natural gas burning is cleaner than coal, and it will replace coal. But if you let too much natural gas escape during the process of drilling and transferring, then you have methane instead of carbon, and methane is a more powerful global warmer than carbon, and you actually get no net benefit. And the way you will get a cleaner fuel is if you regulate it tightly so that you don't have methane losses. It is regulation that will save us. People don't think that way. So this is an example of good regulation that not only has a very strong effect, but is also better for businesses. And we need that kind of regulations. We need that idea. With that idea, we can support strong governance. So this is just to give you an example of how this. Okay, so a lot of things are hidden costs. People have to spend money for their waste disposal, for protective equipment, training their workers, filing permits, monitoring, and if they don't have environmental laws, then they don't really have to do those things. So this applies where they have tight environmental laws, and you have a culture where you do have some environmental protection. So there are costs. Now usually those costs are attributed to the environmental manager, the environmental department. And the manager, the CEO, the chief executive officer, thinks that they are a drag on profits. But the real reason you have these costs is because of the decision to use the toxics, which was not the environmental manager's decision. It was the production supervisor's decision, or the product designer's decision, or the purchasing manager's decision. So we need to make those costs visible and then understand what causes those costs. It is not the environmental programs doing. We get a lot of mileage out of doing this. We get a lot of waking up when we look at the costs. And we also have to take advantage to understand unquantified costs. When you have an unhealthy workplace, you have less productivity. And when you have a product that people think is not clean, they're less willing to buy it. When you have enforcement agencies coming all the time, you have disruptions. And you have people who don't want to do business with you, and you lose commercial opportunities. It is in your benefit to be seen as responsible, and people don't see that. And you can have accidents, and then you have to spend time cleaning up and responding to the incident. You have your places shut down because you have had a fire. Now you have higher insurance. People are suing you. And people don't take account of those costs. They go along waiting for those things to happen. So we try to raise people's attention to the value of doing the right thing. Okay. Pollution is a resource that is in the wrong place. We have to change the way we think about waste and value it. And I saw from some of the projects of making things out of waste that you are already thinking that way here. And all of these problems are clues to how we can make improvements. That is what is the experience I have had of going into companies has led me to believe that it prompts innovation to look at these problems. Problems people don't want to think about. They see no value in thinking about them, but they are prompts. They prompt innovation. Okay, so when we go into places, this is just to illustrate some of the things that we do. I have 2.5 minutes. We look at energy. Are people even looking at all of these issues? These are just examples of things that we can look at for energy: fans and pumps, refrigerators, compressed air. We find in compressed air systems that there are leaks all the time, constant leaks, huge losses, and you can hear them. You can turn everything off and listen for it. Of course, you can also use special equipment to find it. And insulating capacity is a big one. And I've been doing a project on toxic insulation. You need to understand the insulation. And once you tighten up the building, you have to pay attention to ventilation and what you bring in that is toxic. So indoor air quality is something people don't think about very much. People often do not monitor their water conservation, but everyone has a water meter. Well, in the United States, you can go look at the water meter and see what your daily usage, and if it spiked, if it went up, you can ask what happened. No one ever does that until we suggest it. Many different, not many people doing rainwater capture because you have to clean it, but it is an idea worth looking at. But for irrigation is very good. We look at these things, and MSDS is a document that tells you what's in the products that you use and must be provided for worker safety, but it can be used for many other purposes to understand what's going on. Cleaners and solvents are things that we often find different ways to clean and solve, or looking at the reason something needs to be cleaned and changing the process so it doesn't get dirty and doesn't need to be cleaned. And acids, we found that we can often capture and regenerate acids, and we don't have to have big storage of large amounts of acids. We can just keep reusing the acids that we have. And if you have things coming in that are contaminated with these products, such as mercury in chemical reagents in a laboratory, you can order them without that. You can ask for greater purity and avoid discharges. So much more to tell you, but my time is up. Do we have questions, or is that it? Okay. By the way, it's snowing. So I want to thank you first, Tanan, for listening to me.
Yeah, let's thank you. And now, any questions from the audience? Really?
No.
But I think I have a question about when you came to visit in 1995. You said you established here this pollution prevention.
I didn't establish.
No, you
I
helped.
trained, yeah.
You helped. Okay.
Yeah.
But do you have any idea what happened to it?
No, I don't know what happened. All I know is that in the year 2000, there was an international meeting of people doing pollution prevention, and the woman who ran the office, I think her name was Ann Randers. I'm not sure if I'm remembering that correctly. She was there. So it was in existence for at least 5 years. And then I looked on the web, and I saw that there was a case study of water conservation in a meat plant. And then I wanted to read more. I clicked on it, and it came up a warning. It says, do not go to this site. It's an unsafe site. So, but she at least produced one case study, and maybe there was more.
Yeah, it's a start. But you say you go to companies and you help them voluntarily. But in Estonia, people tend to be much inner circled, and I think in here it could be a lot harder to get the company owners to speak. But do you have any?
Yeah, I do have. Thank you. It's a very good question. I don't want you to have the impression that at the beginning this was very easy, that we made the offer of assistance and people said, yes, sure, come. They did not. They were just like you said. In fact, people said, no one will ever have you come on site. They said that to me. And someone else said to me, you are insulting us all because you are implying that we're not doing things right. And you're also arrogant because you're saying that you can tell us what to do. So it was very hard. What I had to do was a lot of workshops about the laws. And people came to the workshops to understand the laws better. Okay? And then we did workshops on things that people can do. Like I did a workshop on acid recycling. And people came. Let's find out about acid recycling. And at the beginning of this program, they all said, we can't do this. And these are crazy ideas. But little by little, people would let us in. Somebody would say, okay, come and just look at this problem that I have. So actually, a big help was I went to the enforcement agency, and I said, will you tell people who are in violation that they should ask us for help? So people who were in trouble would ask us for help, and that helped. So our first our first big breakthrough was from a company that was failing, that was violating water discharge. And I told this story in one of the other groups. One of the engineers, this was not me, got them in compliance immediately. They were plating, and they had a piece went into a bath, and when they pulled it out, it had all the chemicals, and they put it into rinse, and those chemicals were going down the drain. And our engineer said, put it into this bath over here, which doesn't go down the drain. And the chemicals built up in that bath instead of going down the drain, so there was no more discharge. And at the end of the day, the bath where they were plating loses chemicals. And they took this bath, which was collecting them, and poured it back into so it was recovery as well. So he started to save on his chemical purchases, and he was immediately in compliance, and he thought we were the greatest people in the world. And he started telling other people. So you have to keep at it till you have a success. You have to promise confidentiality. You have to be able to tell them you are safe.
Yeah, thank you. Now there's a couple of questions. Yeah, we need to record. Yeah, but we are recording this, so we need to...
Having visited all kinds of factories and different manufacturers, can you say that there's some kind of low-hanging fruits, that some type of manufacturing is easier to detox than others?
Well, I would say a certain type of process is easier than others, and I would say solvent cleaning is a good place to start, because solvent cleaning is typically done with very dangerous materials, with chlorinated solvents, which are very toxic. They're neurotoxic. They don't break down easily, and that is a good place to start, because there's so many options for cleaning. And also, cleaning is done to often remove grease, and there are ways to prevent grease and alternatives to grease, having things get greased, like I said, the shrink wrap plastic. Another alternative is to buy your parts locally, because often they're coated in oil and grease because they're shipped long distances. So it costs more to buy locally, but it's worth it, because you don't have to spend the money on managing the wastes from cleaning the grease off with solvents. There are many safer cleaners to use, so that's a good one to look at. And the acids is another good one to look at, because there are many different ways to keep acids functional. Besides recovering them, you can just measure the pH and make sure that you stay at the right pH, and the acid will not become spent as fast as before. So I know a company that has kept their acid bath alive for so long they call it an immortal etchant. Immortal, never dies. And before, they used to throw it away every week because it would no longer be good. And they do this just by maintaining the pH very carefully. So I would look at solvents and acids are usually maybe not such low-hanging fruits, but... And then for energy, I mentioned air compression. Lighting is, of course, a building envelope. Those are all very quick and very easy to do. Pumps and motors, upgrading is usually a simple thing. I mean, not necessarily simple, but clear and easy to understand. Another thing about low-hanging fruit, that's the expression for things that make common sense and you can do quickly. Low-hanging fruit grows back. So people go in and they say, well, we've already done all the easy stuff. We've already done the low-hanging fruit. Everything's difficult for now. Well, just wait 2 or 3 years and there will be low-hanging fruit again. Good housekeeping. People keeping things clean. So if they're dispensing fluids, often they have a leaky dispenser, and you look at the process and you see leaks, and they have to clean up, and they have absorbents that they then generate more waste. And I think accident prevention is a good one to look at. So people don't expect an accident to happen, or if they have an accident, they have a whole way of responding. But thinking about what causes an accident is a very worthwhile thing to do. Looking how everything is handled and thinking what could go wrong. That's an excellent process because when things go wrong, you have to shut down production. It's very, very costly. So that is a very valuable thing that people don't think about. And we have guidance. If you go to MA/OTA, you can find documents, and we have guidance on something called preventive hazard evaluation. I have another question.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. When we were talking on Friday, we had a chat on changing the economics of the economic system. Could you talk a bit about that?
Yes. I didn't have enough time to say everything that I think. So I think that the change that we need is very big, and I think it is possible. I have talked about pollution, but I think the same lesson can be imported to what we really need to do, and that the root cause of our problems is our economic system and the reasons why we live our lives the way that we do. We live our lives to make money and support ourselves, and that becomes the end, that becomes the purpose, and it should be just something along the way. There should be more to it. There should be a sense that we're all in everything together and we live our lives to make this world better for ourselves and for our children. And that should be our purpose, rather than the current purpose for living right now, which is to succeed economically. And that idea has taken over the world. The world used to be a contest between the communist idea and the capitalist idea, and it was this or that. And now what we need, I believe, is something called social ecology, or an ecological society. We need something that lives within the biophysical limits of the world, and that its purpose is to develop us all individually to our personal, our potential. And instead of just growth, development of art and music and culture and understanding and richness of our lives. And we need to change to something like that. And we need to design everything so that we have that mutual purpose rather than the every person for themselves trying to get rich. That is fragmented, and that is why we are destroying ourselves, because we do not work together as a group with a real purpose of bettering our lives and the lives of our children and all other living things. We do not deserve the term of caretaker of the planet, and evolution created us to be intelligent, and clearly it is our role to be caretakers of this planet together, but we are not working together. So we need to change everything. We need to change how we travel. We need to change how we earn our living. We need to change how we produce our food. What we are doing right now is enormously destructive. We need to change everything. We need to change how we make our clothes. Everything has to change. And the pollution prevention example shows how radical change can be. No one thought that we, just a couple of people, could go in and help change all of these factories' operations, but we have. And we did it not because we are so smart. We did it because they can do it. We did it because the potential is in each factory to do it differently, and we just awakened that potential. This potential to change exists in our societies, but it will not be tapped unless we try to tap it and try to make this change happen. And I'm hoping that the pollution prevention program can serve as an inspiration that change can happen. Yes?
There's a question here. Yeah.
Thank you. You talked about climate change at the beginning of your presentation. So how do you convince people that doesn't believe that it exists, that it really does exist?
Well, I can't actually tell you how I do that because I don't know that I have succeeded in doing that. What I have done is I've given a number of talks where most of the people in the audience understand that climate change is happening and some of the people deny it. And so when I talk about it, the people who deny it are seen to be a minority, and the effect of seeing that there are a lot of other people who accept it, I think makes a difference. And then I discuss it a little bit, and I raise the question about whether there is a belief that it is not happening. Is that based on fact, or is that based on your wish that it is not happening? And then I say it is hard to believe that it is happening because that means you have to do something different. That's inconvenient. That's a hard truth to absorb. So it's harder to believe that, and it's much easier to believe that it's not happening. Then you don't have to do anything. So I try to put it in that way so that maybe they will recognize what they're really doing, which is just believing childishly in something they want to believe in. So I try to do that without insulting them directly. I don't say, you are a childish, immature, stupid person. Can't do that. But I want them to say that to themselves.
We know that it's happening, but we don't know that humans are causing it.
Yes, we do. If you believe in scientific evidence, if you believe that the modern world has created a core of scientists who know how to make things and know how to measure things, then there is no reason to say, well, in this one case, all the scientists are wrong. In this case, we have tremendous scientific consensus, and the people who are saying that humans are not causing it or that it is not happening are a distinct minority who often turn out to be funded by the fossil fuel companies. So it's just common sense that we should believe in the scientists who are doing good work, many of them doing that work even though they are being personally attacked. They are surviving great personal troubles and having their funds cut and being sued, but they want to speak the truth because they see that this is the truth. Plus, it makes common sense. Scientists from the 1800s predicted that if we continued to release carbon dioxide, that the Earth would warm. And it's only happening as a result of common sense science that was seen more than 100 years ago.
Thank you. And let's thank again Richard for his presentation.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Nüüd järgmisena räägib meile Markus Vihma Reet Aun disainist toode, tootmine ja keskkond tekstiilitööstuse näitel.